Get out of my house, now you're going to live on the street, the daughter shouted at her elderly mother. Years later, she was shocked when her mother showed up at her door with a demolition crew. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade tortillas filled the Miller mansion on that Sunday morning in Chicago. Hillary, elegant even in her home attire, set the breakfast table in the sunroom, her favorite place in the house. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting dancing shadows on the white lace tablecloth, an heirloom from her grandmother. As she arranged each detail of the table, she smiled, thinking about how her life had transformed since John joined the family, bringing even more joy to her only daughter, Ashley. The sound of Ashley's heels echoed down the marble hallway leading to the sunroom. Hillary watched her daughter enter, impeccable in her social outfit, even on a Sunday. Ashley had inherited her determination for business, but her late father's sweetness. Behind her, John carried a folder of documents, his inseparable companion, even during times of rest. Hillary admired her son-in-law's commitment to the family business, always present in important decisions of the construction company she had built from scratch. The walls of the sunroom held the family's memories in dozens of photographs. Hillary paused for a moment to observe one in particular, the day of Ashley's graduation, when she officially assumed the vice presidency of the construction company. On that day, Hillary felt she could finally slow down her work pace, confident that her daughter and John would take good care of the empire she had built. "The coffee smells especially aromatic today, Mum," commented Ashley, kissing her mother's cheek as she sat at the table. John helped himself to coffee while discussing the latest ventures of the construction company. Hillary listened attentively to their expansion plans, proud of how quickly he had learned about the real estate market. Her son-in-law had a natural gift for business, and in just 3 years of marriage, he had already tripled the company's value. "You've built an incredible empire, Mrs. Hillary," said John with his characteristic gentle smile, "and we're going to continue your legacy." The sun was already higher when the housekeeper brought a fresh round of coffee. Hillary poured herself another cup, while watching her daughter and son-in-law animatedly discussing the new project in the historic center of Chicago. Ashley gestured enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling as she spoke about architectural preservation, a passion she had inherited from her father. John listened attentively, occasionally making notes on his phone. Hillary found herself thinking about how blessed she had been. After her husband's death, she feared she wouldn't be able to maintain the company and raise Ashley alone. But her daughter had become a strong and capable woman, and John was the son she never had. Together, they formed the family she had always dreamed of for her old age. "I'll go get those documents for the new project," said John, rising with his usual elegance. The aroma of the garden's flowers mingled with the coffee as Hillary savored every moment of that perfect morning. On the table, the blue and white Talavera plates, a wedding gift from Ashley, gleamed under the sunlight. The housekeeper began to discreetly clear away some plates, maintaining the breakfast ritual that repeated every Sunday. It was during these moments that Hillary felt her husband's presence most strongly, as if he were there, proud of the family they had built. Ashley grabbed her phone and began showing her mother photos of the new land they had purchased. Hillary smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm for the project of building a luxury condominium in that prime area of the city. It was the largest investment the construction company had ever made, and her daughter was handling everything masterfully. "John has been incredible on this project, Mum. I don't know what the company would be without him," commented Ashley, with evident admiration for her husband. The sound of John's footsteps returning to the sunroom made Hillary look up. He carried a folder of documents in his hands, his serious expression contrasting with the smile from moments before. Something in his demeanor made Hillary feel an inexplicable chill. "I found some interesting documents in the office," he said, his voice now different, colder. Hillary noticed that Ashley had also changed her posture, straightening in her chair with an expression she had never seen before. The silence that followed was heavy, breaking the morning's harmony like a dark cloud that precedes the storm. Hillary looked into her coffee cup, observing her distorted reflection in the dark liquid, as a sense of apprehension began to take hold of her body. The cozy atmosphere of the breakfast had transformed into something different, something she couldn't define. "Mom," Ashley began, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk about something very serious." John placed the folder on the table with a dull thud, spilling a few drops of coffee from Hillary's cup. The dark liquid stained the white lace tablecloth, forming a small stain that seemed to grow with each passing second. Hillary watched the stain spreading, her heart starting to beat faster, as John opened the folder with deliberately slow movements. Ashley kept her eyes fixed on her mother, her hands trembling slightly as she held her own cup. The documents John began to spread across the table seemed endless. Bank statements, contracts, transfers, all marked with small colored annotation blocks and notes in the margins. Hillary felt her throat go dry when she recognized her signature on several of them, but something was wrong. "We've found evidence of systematic diversions over the past 6 months, Mrs. Hillary," said John, his voice now laden with a coldness she had never noticed before. The sound of the leaves being turned seemed deafening in the silence that had taken over the winter garden. The shadows of the stained glass, once so beautiful, now projected distorted shapes onto the scattered documents. Hillary tried to speak, but her voice failed when she saw the amounts in the transfers. Millions and millions diverted to unknown accounts. "How could you do this to us, Mum?" Ashley's voice cut through the air like a razor, loaded with a hurt that made Hillary's heart ache. The housekeeper, who was still nearby collecting the dishes, stopped her service and discreetly retreated, clearly uncomfortable with the tension that now filled the environment. Hillary tried to get up, but her legs seemed made of jelly. Her vision began to blur at the edges as she tried to understand what was happening. Those transfers, it wasn't me," she managed to mumble, feeling a growing weight in her chest. Ashley rose abruptly, her chair scratching the marble floor with a shrill sound that made Hillary shudder. "All the evidence is here, Mum. How could you steal from your own daughter, from the company Daddy helped build?" Ashley's words echoed in Hillary's head, who felt the air becoming increasingly scarce. John remained standing, her face a mask of studied disappointment, as she continued to present more and more incriminating documents. Hillary's chest began to hurt sharply, a pain that radiated to her left arm. She tried to reach for her water glass, but her fingers felt numb and uncoordinated. "Daughter, please, listen to me." She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak and broken. John continued her methodical presentation of the evidence, her monotonous voice serving as the soundtrack to the nightmare Hillary was living. "Here are the forged invoices, the adulterated contracts. The photographs on the walls, silent witnesses of so many happy moments, now seemed to watch accusingly the scene unfolding." Hillary felt a wave of nausea as she tried to process the accusations she was hearing. Her daughter, her only daughter, believed she was a thief. The weight in her chest increased with every second, and she could feel beads of cold sweat running down her forehead. "I built all of this. Why would I steal?" She tried to argue, but her voice barely came out. Ashley's words mingled in her ears, turning into a distant buzz as the pain in her chest intensified. Hillary tried to lean on the table, knocking over her coffee cup. The porcelain shattered on the floor, the sound seeming strangely distant. She saw John take a step towards her, her face a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Hillary, are you all right?" The world began to spin violently around Hillary. The colors of the stained glass blended into a confused kaleidoscope as she tried to stay conscious. Ashley kept talking, her voice now distant and distorted. "How could you betray our trust like this?" Hillary tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come out. Her last clear vision was of the almost imperceptible smile on John's lips before everything began to darken. "Help," she managed to whisper, before feeling her body sliding off the chair towards the floor. The sound of Hillary's body hitting the marble floor echoed through the winter garden like thunder. The photographs on the walls trembled slightly with the impact, as if even they were shuddering at the scene they were witnessing. The housekeeper, who was still nearby, let out a shrill scream and ran towards her fallen mistress. "Mrs. Hillary!" "Oh my God!" Her words in Spanish breaking the shocked silence that had settled. Ashley froze for a moment, her face changing from anger to concern as she saw her mother unconscious on the floor. Hillary's body was twisted in an unnatural way, her face as pale as the lace towel she treasured so much. Her mother's labored and irregular breathing made Ashley take a step towards her, but John held her by the arm. "Don't go near her," she said, her voice authoritative. "She's always been manipulative. This is just another trick to make us feel sorry for her." The housekeeper kneeling beside Hilary screamed for help, her hands trembling as she tried to check her mistress's vital signs. The other household staff began to gather in the winter garden, their faces showing genuine concern for the woman who had always treated them with respect and dignity. "Call an ambulance, quickly!" the housekeeper shouted, her words mixing Spanish and Portuguese in her despair. Ashley watched the scene as if she were in a nightmare, her heart divided between the anger of the alleged betrayals and the unconditional love of a daughter. John's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of the evidence, the documents, the transfers. But seeing her mother lying on the floor, struggling to breathe, made her whole world spin. "Mom," she whispered, her voice choked by the confusion of feelings that consumed her. The distant sound of a siren began to grow, approaching the mansion. John took advantage of the moment of confusion to quickly gather the documents scattered across the table, carefully putting them back in her briefcase. Hilary's breathing became increasingly difficult, her chest rising and falling irregularly as she struggled for each gulp of air. The housekeeper held her hand, praying softly in Spanish, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. The other staff members ran back and forth, opening the doors for the ambulance that had just arrived, its shrill sound piercing the morning that had begun so peacefully. The paramedic approached quickly, his face serious as he assessed the situation. "Possible heart attack," he declared, beginning the emergency procedures. Hilary remained unconscious, oblivious to the commotion around her, her once vibrant face now etched with pain. Oxygen was applied, electrodes connected, monitors beeping in a concerning rhythm. "We need to take her immediately," announced the paramedic, his voice urgent. As the professionals worked to stabilize Hilary, John remained by Ashley's side, his arm firmly around her shoulders. "It's too much of a coincidence for this to happen just as we discover the embezzlement," he whispered in her ear, planting more seeds of doubt in her already broken heart. Ashley didn't respond, her eyes fixed on her mother being placed on the stretcher, tubes and wires connected to her frail body. The siren wailed again as the paramedics began moving Hilary to the ambulance. Ashley remained motionless, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched her mother being taken away. The housekeeper openly sobbed, being consoled by the other staff. The wheels of the stretcher echoed through the marble hallway, taking Hilary out of the mansion she had built with so much love. The sound of the siren grew louder again as the ambulance departed, carrying the matriarch of the Miller family. Ashley, still in John's embrace, whispered through tears, "How could you do this, Mother?" The sterile white corridors of the emergency unit echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps and tense voices from the medical team. Hilary lay unconscious on the gurney, her pale face contrasting with the crisp white hospital sheets. Doctors moved swiftly around her, connecting monitors and checking vital signs, their grave expressions revealing the severity of the situation. "Patient with suspected acute heart attack, critical blood pressure," announced one of the doctors, his firm voice cutting through the tension-filled air. The heart monitor emitted irregular and concerning beeps, each erratic beat causing the doctors to exchange apprehensive glances. The team's experienced hands worked with precision, administering medications and adjusting equipment. Hilary remained motionless, her shallow, labored breathing aided by an oxygen mask. The head emergency physician, after quickly examining the initial tests, shook his head with concern. "We need to take her to the emergency room immediately." In the waiting room, Ashley paced back and forth, her hands trembling as she tried to process the morning's events. The peaceful breakfast had turned into a nightmare within minutes. The accusations, the documents, her mother's collapse, it all blurred together in her mind like a confusing and painful movie. John remained seated, watching his wife with an expression of apparent concern, occasionally offering words of consolation. "She's strong, Ashley. She'll get through this." The minutes dragged like hours as the medical team continued their work in the emergency room. The sound of machines and medical orders mingled with the hum of the fluorescent corridor lights. Hilary was undergoing a series of emergency procedures, her frail body slowly responding to the treatments. The doctors moved with controlled urgency, aware that every second was precious. "We need to stabilize her before it's too late," murmured the cardiologist, his eyes fixed on the monitors showing increasingly worrying signs. The hospital corridor was quiet, except for the occasional sound of gurneys being moved and hushed conversations between nurses. Ashley had finally taken a seat, her body exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. Her thoughts vacillated between concern for her mother's health and anger at the alleged betrayals uncovered. John held her hand, his thumb making soothing circular motions on her palm in an apparent gesture of comfort. "Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who disappoint us the most," he said softly. In the emergency room, the doctors continued their battle to stabilize Hillary. Her heart had entered a dangerously irregular rhythm, causing the monitor alarms to blare insistently. The medical team moved with renewed urgency, preparing the defibrillator while attempting to reverse the arrhythmia. The cardiologist watched the monitors with mounting tension, knowing the next moments would be crucial. "We'll lose her if we don't act now." The hours dragged on with no concrete news about Hillary's condition. Ashley alternated between periods of silent crying and moments of contained anger, mentally revisiting the documents they had uncovered that morning. John remained by her side, a constant and seemingly comforting presence. The other patients and families in the waiting room cast sympathetic glances towards the couple, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath the surface of family concern. The sound of hurried footsteps drew everyone's attention when a doctor finally appeared in the waiting room. His face was serious, but his eyes conveyed slight relief. "We were able to stabilize her, but the situation is still critical," he informed them, his professional voice masking the tension of the past hours. Ashley let out a trembling sigh, her conflicting emotions evident on her tired face. A nurse approached with a clipboard, requesting information and signatures for additional procedures. As Ashley filled out the forms with shaky hands, John took the opportunity to make some calls, his voice low and controlled as he spoke on the phone. The doctor continued explaining the situation. She suffered a significant heart attack. The next few hours will be crucial for her recovery. The day was turning into night, shadows lengthening across the hospital corridors. Hillary had been transferred to the intensive care unit, where she remained under constant monitoring. Ashley, physically and emotionally exhausted, watched her mother through the glass of the ICU ward, her heart divided between love and a sense of betrayal. John placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "You should go home and rest. I can stay here and take care of everything." The night advanced slowly in the intensive care unit. The bluish light of the monitors created ghostly shadows on Hillary's pale face as she remained unconscious, connected to various machines. Ashley had finally yielded to John's insistence and gone home to rest, leaving him as the solitary guardian of her mother. The rhythmic sound of the equipment was the only company in the silent room, marking each beat of Hillary's weakened heart. John waited patiently until the movement in the hallway diminished. When the night shift took over and the hospital's routine became quieter, he rose from his chair and approached Hillary's bedside. His face, once a mask of concern, now displayed a different, colder and more calculating expression. Leaning over her, he checked if she was truly unconscious before beginning to speak, his voice just a whisper in the quiet room. "It will be all right. Everything as it should be." The monitors continued their steady rhythm as John moved around the room with the familiarity of someone who knew the hospital environment well. His eyes scanned the equipment with clinical interest, observing every number, every reading. Hillary remained motionless, her artificial breathing creating a soft, regular noise. From time to time, her face would twitch slightly, as if even in her semi-conscious state, she could sense the threatening presence by her side. The silence of the night was briefly interrupted when a nurse entered to check Hillary's vital signs. John quickly resumed his role as a dedicated son-in-law, asking appropriate questions about Hillary's condition. The nurse, impressed by his apparent devotion, smiled kindly as she noted down the monitor readings. "It's rare to see such dedicated sons-in-law. Your mother-in-law is lucky to have such a present family." The hours dragged on as John maintained his solitary vigil. From time to time, he would check his phone, exchanging messages with Ashley, assuring her that everything was under control. Hillary occasionally stirred in her drug-induced sleep, her fingers twitching slightly, as if trying to reach for something or someone. John watched these moments with a detached interest, like a scientist studying a particularly intriguing specimen. As the early hours of the morning approached, Hillary's vital signs began to show signs of improvement. Her breathing became more regular, and the numbers on the monitors indicated a gradual stabilization. John observed this recovery with an inscrutable expression, his eyes fixed on the graphs showing her heart's growing strength. The nurse on her rounds commented cheerfully on the progress. "She's a fighter, stronger than she looks." The first rays of sunlight began to filter through the window cracks when Hilary showed the first signs of consciousness. Her eyes moved under closed lids, and her fingers began to twitch more frequently. John approached the bedside again, his presence like a shadow over her. As he watched her increasing movements, his face took on an expression of cold determination. Morning brought with it a new medical team and more movement in the hospital corridors. Hilary was responding better and better to the treatment, her vital force apparently determined to defy expectations. John maintained his position by the bedside, but now his presence seemed more threatening than protective. Each sign of her recovery seemed to add a new layer of tension to his posture. The attending physician made his morning rounds, expressing satisfaction with Hilary's surprising recovery. As he explained the next steps of the treatment, John listened attentively, making mental notes. The positive prognosis did not seem to please him completely, although his face maintained the appropriate expression of relief. "It's good that she's improving, but it will still take time before she's strong enough to go home, won't it?" Ashley arrived at the hospital shortly after dawn, the dark circles under her eyes betraying a sleepless night. She found John exactly where she had left him, apparently not having moved all night. He greeted her with a protective embrace, whispering words of comfort in her ear. Hilary, still sedated but more stable, remained oblivious to the activity around her. The heart monitor maintained its steady rhythm, each beat seeming stronger than the last, as if her heart was determined to survive, against all odds. Hilary's recovery progressed in a surprising way over the following weeks. Her willpower, combined with intensive medical care, allowed her to recover more quickly than expected. The doctors, impressed by her resilience, began talking about hospital discharge. The intensive care unit room, which had been her prison for so long, would finally give way to the comfort of her home. Hilary, still frail but determined, longed for the moment when she could return to her home and clear up all misunderstandings with her daughter. The preparations for hospital discharge were carried out efficiently by the medical team. Hilary was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in regular clothes for the first time in weeks, when Ashley entered the room. Hilary's hopeful smile wilted at the sight of the cold expression on her daughter's face. There were no more tears of concern, only a chilling determination in her eyes. "Things have changed, Mom," Ashley said, her voice carrying a tone Hilary had never heard before. Hilary tried to stand up, her movements still unsteady after the long period of hospitalization. Her heart, though physically stronger, tightened at the coldness of her only child. The words she had rehearsed during so many lonely nights in the hospital died in her throat when she saw the security guards standing at the room's door. The expression on their faces made it clear they were not there to protect her. The hospital corridors, once full of hope for reconciliation, now seemed like a path to the scaffold. Hilary walked slowly, leaning on a cane, while Ashley followed her at a calculated distance. The other patients and visitors watched the scene with curiosity, oblivious to the unfolding drama. With every step towards the exit, Hilary felt the weight of her new reality growing on her shoulders. The afternoon sun hit her face as the hospital doors opened, but its warmth did not reach her heart. The car awaiting her was not her familiar driver, but an anonymous taxi. Ashley remained a few steps behind, her stance rigid and distant. Hilary turned to her daughter one last time, her eyes pleading for a chance at explanation. The security guards moved closer, their presence a silent threat. Hilary realized there was no room for pleas or explanations at that moment. Everything she had built, all the love she believed to be unconditional, was crumbling before her eyes. The cold afternoon wind seemed to mock her fragility, carrying with it the last hopes of a peaceful return home. Ashley's words cut through the air like razors. "Get out of my house, now you're going to live on the street." The cruelty of that order echoed through the hospital parking lot, causing some people to stop and watch. Hilary felt her legs weaken, the cane trembling in her hand. The security guards took a step forward, making their intention clear to enforce the order of their new boss. Hilary's eyes filled with tears as she watched the daughter she had raised with so much love now orchestrate her expulsion. The taxi driver, embarrassed by the scene, kept the engine running, waiting for the outcome of this family drama. Hillary realized she had no choice but to get into the taxi, with no destination, no belongings, just the clothes on her back. The sound of the taxi door closing echoed like a period at the end of her former life. Through the glass, Hillary saw her daughter turn her back and walk towards the security guards, who escorted her back to the parking lot. The taxi began to move, taking her away from everything she knew and loved. The driver, sensing her helplessness, gently asked, "Where to, Mum?" Hillary took one last look at the hospital through the rear window, seeing her daughter disappear into the distance. With a trembling voice, she replied, "I don't know. I have nowhere to go." The taxi plunged into city traffic, carrying with it a woman who in a matter of weeks had lost everything, her home, her company, and the love of her only daughter. The sky was beginning to brighten when Hillary finally allowed herself to slide to the ground, her legs no longer supporting her weight. The cold concrete beneath her was a cruel reminder of her new reality. Watching the first signs of morning, she thought of all the people she had helped over the years, of all the contacts she had, but her pride, or perhaps the shock of her situation, prevented her from seeking help. "I need to find a way on my own, as I always have," she thought, as the city began to awake for another day. The second day on the streets began with the rising sun warming the wet concrete. Hillary felt every muscle in her body protest after the uncomfortable night under the marquee. Her hair, once always impeccable, was disheveled, and her crumpled clothes betrayed her situation. The city's movement gradually increased, with hurried people passing by her on their way to work, some averting their gaze, others casting disapproving looks. Hunger had become a constant companion, her stomach protesting painfully. Hillary gathered her strength and, leaning on her cane, began to walk down the street in search of some familiar place. Her legs were still weak from her hospitalization, and every step was a monumental effort. The sun now punished mercilessly, making her seek shade to rest frequently. At the end of the avenue, Hillary recognized the familiar facade of a restaurant she used to frequent. Her heart accelerated with a glimmer of hope. The owner had known her for years. Surely he would help her with a meal. Gathering what was left of her dignity, she adjusted her crumpled clothes as best she could and walked towards the establishment. The restaurant's air conditioning hit her like a cruel reminder of her lost comfort. The well-dressed patrons stopped their conversations for a moment to observe her. The maitre d', who had so often pulled out her chair and recommended wines, now looked at her with a mixture of recognition and embarrassment. "Mrs. Hillary," he began, his voice low and hesitant, "perhaps it would be better if you came back another time." The patron's whispers reached her ears as she stood at the restaurant's entrance. "Isn't that the businesswoman? I heard she lost everything. How does someone fall so low?" Hillary felt her face burn with shame, but she remained steadfast, leaning on her cane. The restaurant owner, alerted by the commotion, approached with quick, decisive steps. "Hillary, please," he said in a low voice, gently but firmly touching her arm. "You're scaring the customers. I can't allow you to stay here in this state." The words hit her like slaps, each one reminding her of how many times she herself had been one of those people seated, judging the less fortunate from outside the windows. The afternoon sun was even stronger when Hillary found herself back on the sidewalk, now with silent tears streaming down her face. Her legs trembled with the effort of keeping herself standing, and the cane seemed heavier and heavier in her hands. The hunger and thirst were becoming unbearable, but her pride had been wounded too much to try entering another establishment. The hours dragged on as she wandered aimlessly through the streets that had once been her territory. Every shop window reflected an image she barely recognized as her own. Her thoughts were a confused mix of memories from the past and the harsh reality of the present. Exhaustion was beginning to take over her still weakened body. As evening fell, the temperature began to drop again. Hillary found a park bench partially protected by a large tree. Her body ached in places she didn't even know could ache, and her mind was numb with fatigue and hunger. Passers-by were now just blurs in her blurred vision. A strong dizziness made her cling to the bench more tightly. The world spun around her, and she could feel her strength quickly draining. Her vision began to darken at the edges, and she realized she was about to faint. In her last moments of consciousness, she heard a familiar voice calling her name, but it seemed too distant to be real. The world spun in slow motion as Hillary struggled to maintain consciousness. People passed by like undefined shadows, their voices blending into a distant hum. The park bench, her only support at that moment, seemed to melt beneath her exhausted body. Hunger, fatigue, and dehydration were finally taking their toll after 2 days on the streets. Her heavy eyes began to close when a soft touch on her shoulder partially brought her back to reality. She tried to focus her blurred vision on the figure now leaning over her, a silhouette that seemed vaguely familiar. The delicate perfume that reached her nostrils awakened distant memories of a time when her life was completely different. A gasp of surprise and concern cut through the afternoon air. "Hillary, my God, what did they do to you?" The voice was unmistakable. Margaret Smith, her former partner from the early days of the construction company. Hillary tried to answer, but her words came out as an inaudible whisper. Her strength had been completely exhausted. Margaret, or Marga as she was known, immediately took control of the situation. With the help of her driver who accompanied her, she began to lift Hillary from the bench. The gentle touch on her arms was the first gesture of affection she had received in days, and silent tears began to stream down her face, marked by fatigue. The sky was beginning to darken as Marga tried to help Hillary stand up. The few people still passing through the park watched the scene with curiosity, some recognizing the former famous businesswoman in her current state. Hillary could hear the whispers and comments, but now they seemed to come from far away. With considerable effort, Marga and her driver managed to support Hillary, who could barely stand. Her body, still weakened by hospitalization and debilitated by days on the streets, no longer responded to her commands. The cane fell to the ground with a dull thud, the sound echoing in the nearly empty square. The twilight cast long shadows over the trio as they finally managed to reach Marga's car. Hillary felt herself floating between consciousness and unconsciousness, fragments of memory mingling with present reality. The soft leather seat of the car seemed unreal after so long on the cold concrete of the streets. Marga held Hillary's hand firmly as the driver drove. Her voice was soft but determined. "I'm taking you to my house. You need urgent care." Hillary wanted to thank her, wanted to explain everything that had happened, but her strength had been completely depleted. In her last moments of consciousness, Hillary heard Marga speaking on the phone, urgently requesting a doctor. The smooth movement of the car rocked her exhausted body, while the city lights passed in blurs through the tinted windows. Finally, after 2 days of torment on the streets, Hillary allowed herself to relax, knowing she was safe. The last thing Hillary registered before completely losing consciousness was Marga's worried voice telling the doctor, "She's very weak, doctor. Looks like she's been on the streets for days." "Yes, it's her, Hillary Miller." "No, I don't know what happened, but I'll find out. Please come quickly." Margaret Smith's guest room was an oasis of comfort after the days of torment on the streets. Hillary, now clean and medicated, was sitting in a soft armchair near the window. The afternoon sun streamed softly through the silk curtains, illuminating her still pale but already recovering face. Her hands, once trembling with hunger and fatigue, now held a cup of hot tea. Marga was sitting in front of her, her dark eyes full of concern as she listened to her friend's painful account. Silent tears streamed down Hillary's face as she narrated the events that had led her to this situation. The fateful breakfast, the accusations, the heart attack, the expulsion from the hospital. Each word seemed to rip a piece of her soul away. The room was silent except for Hillary's choked voice and the occasional clink of the cup on the coffee table. The cream-colored walls seemed to absorb the pain of every word spoken, while Marga occasionally discreetly wiped away her own tears. The story of a daughter's betrayal against her own mother hung in the air like a dense cloud of sadness. Hillary paused her narrative for a moment, her hands gripping the cup tightly as she tried to control the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Marga took the opportunity to stand up and open the curtains wider, letting in more light. The simple gesture seemed to try to bring a glimmer of hope into that somber conversation. The hours ticked by as Hillary continued her account, each painful detail being shared with her old friend and business partner. Marga listened attentively, her face alternating between expressions of shock and indignation. The household staff came in occasionally to bring more tea or small snacks, their discreet presences like silent shadows. The sun was starting to set when Hillary finally finished her story. Her face was marked by the emotional fatigue of reliving every moment of that nightmare. Marga remained silent for a few moments, processing everything she had heard. The tick-tock of the clock on the wall marked the tense seconds that followed. It was Marga who broke the silence, her voice calm but determined. "Hilary, you need to talk to John. He always seemed so dedicated to the family, so close to you. Maybe he can help Ashley understand that there's something wrong with this whole story." Hilary looked up, a small spark of hope igniting in her tired gaze. Marga's suggestion made sense. John had always been the family's safe harbor, the perfect son-in-law that every mother-in-law dreamed of having. Hilary remembered how he had always treated her with respect and affection, how he seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being. Perhaps he could be the bridge to regaining her daughter. The plan began to take shape as the two women talked. Marga insisted that Hilary should try one last contact with the family through John. "He's always been sensible," Marga argued. "Maybe away from Ashley's immediate influence, he can see the situation more clearly." Night had fallen when Hilary finally agreed to the plan. Tomorrow she would go to her former home, try to talk to John, make one last effort to clarify that whole situation. Marga squeezed her hand in a gesture of support and encouragement. "It'll all work out, friend. You'll see." The following morning dawned clear and cold when Hilary arrived at her former mansion. Marga's driver dropped her off near the main gate, where she had so often entered and exited as the owner of that place. Now standing there on the sidewalk, she felt like a stranger observing her own life through a window. The security guards recognized her immediately, their faces showing a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. Hilary maintained an upright posture, dressed in borrowed clothes from Marga, trying to gather the dignity she had left. "I need to speak with Mr. John," she said, her voice steadier than her racing heart suggested. Long minutes ticked by as the guards made contact by radio. Hilary could see movement through the gates, staff hurrying past and casting furtive glances in her direction. The wait seemed endless, each second weighing like lead on her tired shoulders. Finally, the gate began to open with a metallic creak that seemed to echo down the entire street. John appeared, walking calmly across the garden toward her. His face, once always smiling and welcoming, now displayed an expression Hilary had never seen before. There was something different in his eyes, something cold and distant. "Mrs. Hilary," he began, his voice carrying a tone she didn't recognize. "You shouldn't be here." Before she could respond, he gestured to the guards. "Bring her things," he ordered, his voice cutting like ice. Hilary felt her heart clench as she realized this was not the same man she had known. The following minutes turned into a slow-motion nightmare. Staff began to appear carrying suitcases and boxes, tossing them unceremoniously onto the sidewalk. Clothes, shoes, personal belongings, her entire life being dumped onto the street like trash. Hilary watched, paralyzed, as her memories scattered across the ground. John oversaw everything with calculated coldness, occasionally ordering them to hurry up. "You should be grateful we're returning your personal belongings considering what you did," he said, his voice laced with a cruelty that made her shudder. After all, thieves don't usually get that privilege. Tears began streaming down Hilary's face as she bent down to gather her things from the ground. Expensive dresses that once filled her closet with elegance now lay soiled and crumpled on the sidewalk. Family photos spilled from poorly closed boxes, scattering like leaves in the wind. Some neighbors started appearing at their windows, drawn by the noise and commotion. Hilary could hear the whispers, see the cell phones pointed in her direction, feel the weight of curious and judgmental stares. Her humiliation was being turned into a public spectacle. The sun was already high when the last box was emptied. Hilary, exhausted and humiliated, tried to organize her belongings into somewhat dignified piles. John watched everything from the entrance, his presence a looming shadow over the scene. "Don't come back here again," he finally said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to mock all the respect he had once shown. The moment the gate closed for the last time sounded like a final sentence for Hilary. She remained there, amidst her scattered belongings, feeling the weight of every curious neighbor's gaze, every barely disguised passerby's whisper. A blue silk dress, her favorite for special occasions, lay in the puddle formed by the garden sprinklers. With trembling hands, Hilary began gathering her memories from the ground. Each object seemed to tell a different story from her former life. The picture frame with Ashley's first day of school photo, the brooch her husband had given her on their last anniversary together, the love letters they had exchanged while dating. Everything now stained by sidewalk dust. The guards remained posted, watching her every move as if she were a criminal about to commit a crime. Hilary could sense their discomfort. These were the same men who had treated her with respect and deference for years. Now they avoided her gaze, as if the shame was shared. The midday sun punished her mercilessly as she continued her humiliating task. Her back ached from repeatedly bending over, and her still fragile heart protested with every movement. An elderly lady passing by stopped to help her, but was quickly shooed away by one of the guards. Hilary found an old travel bag among her belongings and began stowing away what she could inside it. Her hands shook so much she could barely zip it closed. Every piece of clothing folded, every item stored was like reliving the loss of her dignity all over again. Sweat trickled down her face, mingling with silent tears. Marga's driver, who had remained discreetly watching from afar, approached to help. Together they organized what could be carried at the moment. The rest would have to be left behind, another loss added to so many others. Hilary felt as if each abandoned object on the sidewalk was a piece of her life being torn away. When they finally finished gathering what they could, Hilary rose with difficulty. Her legs could barely support her after hours of humiliation under the sun. She took one last look at her house, at the windows where she had so often watched the sunset, at the garden where she had played with Ashley. It all now seemed to belong to a distant dream. It was in that moment, as she watched her life reduced to a few bags on the sidewalk, that Hilary felt something awaken within her. It wasn't anger nor sadness. It was a determination she knew well, the same that had once built her empire. Straightening her shoulders, even as her body protested, she picked up the last dress from the ground. The people still watching the scene saw something shift in that woman's demeanor. Hilary Miller, the businesswoman who had built an empire from scratch, raised her head, and in a voice clear enough for everyone to hear, uttered the words that would mark the beginning of her rebuilding. "I will uncover the truth, and I will rise again, just as I always have in my life." The driver opened the car door as Hilary walked towards him, leaving behind not only objects, but also the last illusion of the life she had lost. The determination in her eyes contrasted with the tears still marking her face, a silent testament that sometimes you have to lose everything to find the strength to start over. The sun set over Margaret Smith's elegant home, painting the sky in tones of orange and pink that seemed ironically festive for such a somber day. Hilary was seated in the library, a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves. The bags she had managed to rescue from her former life were discreetly piled in a corner, silent witnesses to her humiliation. Marga served her friend a cup of tea, watching with concern as Hilary's trembling hands held the fine porcelain. The gentle aroma of jasmine filled the air, vainly attempting to soothe her frayed nerves. Hilary had just recounted the degrading events of that morning, each word seeming to drain what little strength she had left. The library, with its antique books and classic furnishings, created an atmosphere of safety that contrasted starkly with the emotional violence Hilary had just experienced. The silk curtains swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, carrying the scent of the garden. It was a scene that reminded her so much of her former life, making the awareness of her current situation all the more painful. Marga broke the contemplative silence that had settled. "Hilary, you've always been more than a partner to me. It was you who gave me the first opportunity when no one else believed in me." Her voice carried the weight of shared memories, of a friendship forged through years of mutual achievements and challenges. The antique clock on the wall marked the hours with its steady cadence, reminding that time did not stop, even when life seemed to crumble. Hilary gazed at the amber liquid in her cup, seeing in it the distorted reflection of her tired face. The past few weeks had left deep marks not only on her soul, but also on her always carefully groomed appearance. Night started to approach when Marga rose from her armchair and walked to an old oak desk. With deliberate movements, she retrieved a folder of documents from one of the drawers. Her steps were firm as she returned to sit down, placing the folder on the coffee table with a clear purpose in her gestures. The silence between the two women was comfortable, laden with years of mutual understanding and respect. Hilary could sense her friend was formulating something in her mind, weighing words and considering possibilities. It was a trait she had always admired in Marga, her ability to think strategically even in the toughest moments. Shadows lengthened across the library as the day drew to a close, creating interesting patterns on the bookshelves. Hilary adjusted herself in her armchair, feeling the weight of the day on her tired shoulders. Her mind was still filled with images of her clothes strewn across the sidewalk, but something in Marga's stance was beginning to pique her curiosity. The moment seemed suspended in time when Marga finally opened the folder on the table. Documents, blueprints, and projects filled the pages, all carefully organized. "Hilary," she began, her voice carrying a note of determination, "I have a proposition for you." The last rays of daylight illuminated Marga's face as she began to explain her idea, her eyes shining with a mixture of compassion and purpose. "Do you remember when we started together? Perhaps it's time to rebuild something new once again." "I'm planning to open a new construction company," Marga revealed, spreading the documents across the coffee table. Architectural blueprints, feasibility studies, and financial projections formed a mosaic of possibilities before Hilary's eyes. "And I want you to be my partner again." The words hung in the library's air like an offer of salvation. Hilary felt her heart quicken, a confused mixture of emotions taking hold in her chest. She fixed her eyes on the documents, her hands instinctively moving to organize them more systematically, a habit from years of managing projects. "Marga, I have nothing to invest. I lost everything." Her voice faltered on the last word. Marga leaned forward, her eyes meeting her friend's with intensity. "You have something far more valuable than money, Hilary. You have experience, knowledge, and most importantly, you have the market's trust. Your name still means a lot in this business." She paused, watching her friend's reaction. "The initial capital will be mine, but I need you to make this work." The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities and fears. Hilary rose from her armchair and walked to the window, gazing at the garden now bathed in twilight. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of doubts. "I don't know if I have the strength to start again, Marga. Not after everything that happened." The folder of documents remained open on the table, calling like a siren's song. Marga continued, "I have 3 sites ready for immediate development. The market is hot in that area, and with your expertise in residential projects." She was cut off by Hilary's abrupt gesture. "What if I fail again?" Hilary's voice trembled. "What if I'm no longer capable? I lost my company, my daughter, my home." Tears threatened to return, but she held them back with effort. Marga rose and approached her friend, placing a hand on her shoulder. The reflection of the 2 women in the window pane told a story of resilience. "Hilary, you built an empire from nothing once. You did it alone, after your husband passed away. If you could do it before, you can do it again." The conviction in Marga's voice was almost tangible. A night breeze drifted in through the window, gently rustling the curtains. Hilary closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories of her past achievements flow through her mind. Every building erected, every project completed, every obstacle overcome. It had all been part of a journey she knew well. Hesitation still lingered in her voice when she finally responded, "I don't know if I'm ready, Marga. I need to first understand what happened. I need to figure out how my life unraveled so quickly." Her hands clasped together, betraying her anxiety. Marga gathered the documents calmly, reorganizing them back into the folder. Her face showed understanding, but also an unwavering determination. "The best way to understand the past is by strengthening yourself in the present, my friend, and that is exactly what I'm offering you. A chance to rise again." Hilary remained silent for long moments, her eyes roaming the library that now served as her temporary refuge. Marga's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the memories of the past traumatic days. The ticking of the antique clock marked time, reminding her that life went on regardless of her hesitations. Something began to shift in her expression as she examined the documents on the table once more. Her fingers, once trembling, now slid firmly over the blueprints and projects. Years of experience emerged instinctively as she analyzed every detail, every number, every possibility the papers presented. Marga watched the transformation with a discreet smile. It was like watching a phoenix rising from the ashes, slowly, but with an undeniable inner strength. Hilary began to make mental notes, her eyes regaining a sparkle they had long lost. "This land here," she murmured, pointing to one of the plants, "has potential for a vertical condominium." The silence of the night was broken only by the soft sound of the pencil sliding over the paper, as Hilary made some notes in the margins of the documents. Her movements were becoming more confident, more precise, as if each calculated number, each observation made, was rebuilding not only a project, but her own confidence. Suddenly, Hilary stood up. Her face had a different expression now, no longer one of defeat, but of determination. She walked to the window again, but this time her reflection showed a transformed woman. "I accept," she said, her voice firm for the first time in weeks. "But with one condition." Margot waited in silence as Hilary turned to face her. The lamplight cast dramatic shadows on her face as she continued, "When I rise again, I will find out what that man did to my daughter's head." Her hands found an old photograph on the table, an image from Ashley's wedding day. With deliberate movements, Hilary tore the photograph in half, separating the smiling son-in-law's image from the rest of the family. The sound of the paper tearing echoed through the library like a silent promise. The half with John slowly fell into the trash, while she kept the other part, where she and her daughter were smiling, in her purse. Margot extended her hand, offering Hilary a pen to sign the partnership documents. The moment seemed laden with meaning as the two friends shook hands, sealing not only a business deal, but a promise of a fresh start. Hilary held the pen firmly, her signature as elegant as it had always been, marking the beginning of her journey back to the top. Hilary leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of reflection. For 2 years, she had focused on rebuilding her life, proving to herself that she was still capable. But now, with her new business established and her confidence restored, she felt it was time to begin unraveling the mysteries of the past. With methodical care, Hilary began organizing a folder with all the data she had collected. Dates of suspicious transfers, mismatched values, strange patterns of property sales. Everything pointed to something larger, something she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The clock was nearing noon when she finally decided to reply to the message, setting up a meeting for that afternoon. Her fingers hesitated for a moment over the keyboard, aware that each step from here would need to be calculated with extreme precision. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of her lunch. Hilary stood up, stretching her back after hours hunched over the computer. As she passed the hallway mirror, she noticed her expression had changed. She was no longer just the businesswoman rebuilding, but a woman in search of the truth. "It's time to find out what really happened," she murmured to herself as she carefully closed the folder with her findings. The sound of her heels echoed through the apartment as she prepared for what would be, unbeknownst to her, the beginning of a much larger revelation than she imagined. The cafe chosen for the meeting was in a discreet area of the city, far from the social circles Hilary used to frequent. She arrived purposefully early, choosing a table in the back of the establishment where she could observe who came and went. Her folder of documents rested at her side, like a weapon ready to be wielded. The former company accountant, Alberto Ramirez, entered the cafe precisely at the agreed-upon time. Hilary recognized him immediately, though he looked thinner and more tense than she remembered. His eyes nervously scanned the surroundings before locating her, and his steps were hesitant as he approached the table. "Mrs. Hilary?" he greeted in a low voice, sitting down. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Thank you for coming. What I have to show you, well, it needed to be in person." He took a small data device from his pocket, placing it discreetly on the table. Hilary eyed the small object intently. "What did you find, Alberto?" she asked, keeping her voice controlled, despite the anxiety growing in her chest. The accountant looked around once more before leaning forward, lowering his voice further. "The digital signatures, Mrs. Hilary. I started noticing something strange about them right after you. Well, after everything happened. All the suspicious transfers were made on impossible dates, weekends and holidays, when the system was on scheduled maintenance. Nobody could have made those transactions during those times." Hilary's heart raced as she absorbed the information. Her hands clutching the coffee cup trembled slightly. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely containing the emotion. Alberto nodded, pushing the small data device toward her. "It's all documented here. System logs, maintenance records, dates of the transfers. Someone forged those documents, Mrs. Hilary. Someone who knew the inner workings of the company intimately." The fear in his eyes was evident as he continued. "I was fired a week after I started investigating this." Hilary felt a chill run down her spine. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture she wasn't yet ready to fully accept. With careful hands, she tucked the small data device into her purse. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked, studying the tense face of the former employee. Alberto swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the table. "Because I couldn't live with it, Mrs. Hillary. You were always fair to us, and to see what they did. It's not right." The coffee had gone cold in their cups, forgotten during the tense conversation. Hillary felt the weight of the revelations on her shoulders, but also a growing determination. She finally had something concrete, tangible proof that her memory hadn't been betraying her. The late afternoon found Hillary in her office once again, the flash drive connected to the computer, as she meticulously examined each document. The evidence was crystal clear: spreadsheets, system logs, maintenance records. Everything pointed to an elaborate sham. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the files, each new discovery confirming her suspicions. The monitor cast a bluish glow over her focused face as she compared dates and times. It was impossible for her to have made those transfers. The system was completely offline during the logged moments. Someone had meticulously planned her downfall, using inside knowledge of the company to forge the evidence. One file in particular caught her attention, a folder containing records of every weekend and holiday when the financial system was under maintenance. Comparing these dates to the supposed fraudulent transfers, the pattern was undeniable. "How did we not see this before?" she murmured to herself, feeling a mixture of anger and relief. Her hands flew across the keyboard as she organized the evidence into a clear, irrefutable presentation. Each document, each record, each proof of forgery was carefully catalogued. The clock neared midnight when she finally finished, her back aching from the long hours seated. Hillary stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights. 2 years of her life had been destroyed by this manipulation. 2 years away from her daughter, her home, everything she had built. The sting of betrayal burned in her chest. But now she had a new purpose. The phone rang, breaking the silence of the apartment. It was Alberto, his voice tense on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Hillary, there's something else I need to tell you. I found other records." It seems this wasn't the first time this happened. There are similar patterns in other companies. Hillary felt her heart race with the new information. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a larger and more disturbing picture than she had imagined. Her gaze fell on the torn photo on her desk, her and Ashley smiling, the part with John discarded long ago. With determined movements, Hillary began to plan her next steps. She needed to find a way to make her daughter see the truth, but she knew she would need to be careful. Years of manipulation would not be undone easily. The former accountant had given her the tools. Now it was time to use them. The monitor was still glowing with the evidence when she finally turned off the computer. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first of her true revenge. It would not be a revenge born of hatred, but of justice, of the need to reveal the truth and regain her daughter. The breakfast at the small restaurant was almost empty at that hour of the afternoon. Alberto Ramirez had purposefully chosen a discreet place, away from prying eyes and indiscreet tongues that could spread the information he brought. His fingers trembled slightly as he swirled the almost untouched coffee cup. Hillary watched the former accountant with a mixture of expectation and caution. Her years of business experience had taught her to read between the lines, to perceive the signs of nervousness that preceded important revelations. "I need you to understand the gravity of what I've discovered," Alberto began, his voice low, almost a whisper. The few customers in the restaurant seemed distant, as if an invisible bubble separated them from the crucial conversation unfolding. He opened a worn folder, removing a series of printed documents and a black thumb drive. The sheets were marked with colorful post-its, handwritten notes in the margins, a chaotic mosaic of information. "When I was fired," Alberto continued, adjusting the glasses that slipped down his sweaty nose, "I began investigating something that seemed strange to me in the financial records. At first, I thought they were just minor inconsistencies." Hillary leaned forward, her breathing almost imperceptibly held. Every move Alberto made seemed to carry the weight of a long-guarded secret. "The transfers that were attributed to you," he slid a printed spreadsheet across the table, "were all made on days and times that were impossible. Weekends, holidays, moments when the system was completely offline for maintenance. Hillary's fingers ran through the spreadsheet, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed every number, every date. Years of financial experience made her see beyond the simple data. She saw patterns, she saw strategies. "It's practically mathematical," Alberto whispered, his trembling hand pointing to a specific column. "Look here, a $2 million transfer made at 3:15 on an Easter Sunday. The security system was under complete maintenance. No operational terminal could have generated that operation. Hillary's coffee cup was forgotten, the liquid cooling abandoned on the table." Each word from Alberto was like a piece of a puzzle that began to reveal a larger and more disturbing picture. "It wasn't just one or two occurrences," he continued, unfolding more documents. "A systematic pattern of forgery. Someone with internal access to the systems, deep knowledge of security protocols, created a method to forge these transfers." The black thumb drive seemed to weigh on the table, a simple object that carried with it the potential to destroy or rebuild entire lives. Alberto pushed it discreetly towards Hillary. "All the evidence is here," he said, his voice trembling. "System logs, maintenance records, comparative digital signatures. It's impossible for you to have made those operations." Hillary felt a warmth rise up her neck. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was the feeling of justice finally approaching like a long-awaited horizon. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice controlled. "Why risk everything to help me?" Alberto lowered his eyes, his hands nervously clutching a paper napkin. "Because I saw my own family be destroyed by con artists like him. I saw good people lose everything because of unscrupulous manipulators." A heavy silence filled the restaurant. The waiter passed discreetly without interrupting the moment. Outside, the life of Chicago went on, oblivious to that conversation that could change everything. "If anyone finds out I spoke to you..." Alberto hesitated, his face turning even paler. Hillary reached out her hand, covering the former accountant's trembling hand. "You will be protected," she promised, her voice firm as steel. "My word carries weight in this city." The former accountant took a deep breath, as if an immense weight had been removed from his shoulders. "Mrs. Hillary, look at the dates of the digital signatures. They were made on weekends when the system was under maintenance." "Hey, it's impossible. Someone forged all of this." The words echoed, filling every corner of that small restaurant. Hillary carefully tucked the thumb drive into her leather bag, her movements precise, calculated. The truth at last was beginning to surface. Outside, the sun of Chicago continued to shine, a silent witness to a moment that would forever change the destiny of a family. The Imperial Hotel's conference room exuded luxury and power, with its walls paneled in fine wood and windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Hillary had chosen this location strategically, neutral enough not to raise suspicions, yet elegant enough for a high-level business meeting. Her presentation was impeccably organized on the mahogany table, each document a puzzle piece she had meticulously assembled. 15 minutes remained before the scheduled time. Hillary adjusted her posture in the leather chair, double-checking the documents before her. The invitation for the meeting had been sent through intermediaries, presented as a partnership proposal between construction companies. She knew Ashley wouldn't refuse. The numbers were too enticing to ignore. The reflection in the window glass showed a different woman from the one who had been expelled from her own home 2 years ago. Hillary now radiated a confidence that came not only from the success of her new company, but from the certainty that she finally had all the necessary evidence. Her hands, once trembling with uncertainty, now rested firmly on the folder containing the truth. The sound of heels in the hallway made her heart race. Hillary took a deep breath, preparing herself for the moment she had mentally rehearsed hundreds of times. The conference room door opened, and Ashley entered, elegant in her business suit, stopping abruptly upon recognizing her mother. Her face went from surprise to shock, and then to anger. "What does this mean?" Ashley demanded, her voice shaking slightly. She remained close to the door, as if deciding whether to stay or leave. Hillary kept calm, indicating the chair in front of her. "Please, daughter, 5 minutes is all I ask. After that, you can leave if you want." The seconds that followed seemed an eternity, as Ashley considered her options. Finally, perhaps moved by curiosity, or a remnant of respect for the years of business education she had received from her mother, she moved toward the table. Her movements were tense, calculated, like those of a cornered animal. "I have something to show you," Hillary began, her voice controlled as she opened the folder of documents. "Something that will change everything you believe happened 2 years ago." Ashley sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the papers her mother began arranging on the table. The air conditioning hummed softly as Hillary initiated her presentation, each document carefully selected to tell the story of the betrayal that had destroyed their lives. The evidence was irrefutable: system logs, maintenance records, patterns of impossible transfers. The minutes ticked by as Hillary explained each piece of evidence, watching her daughter's expressions gradually shift from initial disbelief to something more complex, a mixture of confusion and growing horror. Ashley, trained in business from a young age, couldn't deny the logic of the evidence presented. But how? Ashley finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. Hillary slid the last document across the table, the full report from the former accountant, detailing how the forgeries had been executed. "Someone who knew our company very well, daughter. Someone who planned every detail meticulously." Understanding began to slowly form on Ashley's face as she examined the documents more closely. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned from one page to the next, her eyes widening at each new revelation. Hillary remained silent, allowing the truth to do its work. "All the transfers," Ashley murmured, her voice choked, "were made on system maintenance weekends when no one could access the accounts." She looked up at her mother, tears beginning to form. "But John said he showed so much evidence." Hillary leaned forward, her heart aching to see the pain in her daughter's eyes. "The evidence was falsified, dear. Every document, every transfer, every accusation, it was all carefully forged to incriminate me." She slid another document across the table, records of other companies that had suffered similar scams. The sound of paper rustling filled the room as Ashley absorbed each new piece of information. Her hands began to tremble more violently, knocking some papers to the floor. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her like an avalanche. "Nurse," Ashley shook her head, abruptly standing up. "It can't be true. John loves me. He helped me when you—" Her voice failed, the words lost in a stifled sob. Hillary remained seated, letting her daughter process the shock in her own way. The following minutes were filled only by the sound of Ashley's muffled crying as she now paced back and forth across the room. The evidence on the table seemed to scream the truth she tried to deny. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice broken. "Why would he do this?" Hillary rose slowly, approaching her daughter with caution. "Because it was the plan all along, dear. To separate mother and daughter, take control of the company, sell the assets at undervalued prices to shell companies." She trailed off, seeing Ashley's face pale even further. The weight of the betrayal seemed too physical for Ashley to bear. Her legs gave out, and she had to lean against the table to keep from falling. Years of manipulation and lies crumbled before her eyes, leaving only the painful truth exposed. "Mum," Ashley whispered, her voice laden with remorse and horror. "What have I done? What did I allow to happen?" Tears now streamed freely down her face, staining the documents on the table. Hillary took a step toward her daughter, her heart breaking to see the anguish in her eyes. It was at that moment that Ashley staggered, her legs finally giving way under the weight of the revelations. Hillary moved quickly to support her, but she wasn't fast enough. Her daughter slid to the floor unconscious, the emotional shock proving too much to bear. Hillary's apartment was silent, except for the soft sound of Ashley's breathing as she rested on the couch. After fainting in the meeting room, Marga had helped transport her to a safer and more familiar environment. The doctor had just left, assuring it was only a reaction to severe emotional stress. The curtains gently swayed with the afternoon breeze as Hillary watched her sleeping daughter. Ashley's face, even at rest, still carried the marks of shock and pain from the revelations. Occasionally, her eyebrows would furrow, as if even in sleep she was fighting against the truth she had uncovered. Marga silently entered the room, bringing Hillary a cup of tea. The two friends exchanged meaningful glances. There was so much to be said, but the moment called for silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall marked the minutes that seemed to drag on forever. A soft moan drew the attention of the two women. Ashley was beginning to wake up, her eyes slowly opening, trying to recognize where she was. For a moment she seemed confused, until the memory of the previous events came back like a wave. She sat up abruptly, her eyes meeting her mother's. "It wasn't a nightmare, was it?" Ashley asked, her voice hoarse. Hilary approached, sitting beside her daughter. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of hurt and regret. Tears began to stream down Ashley's face again, but this time they were different, no longer of shock but of deep remorse. "Forgive me, Mom," Ashley sobbed, throwing herself into Hilary's arms. "How could I have been so blind? How could I have done that to you?" The words came out choked by sobs, years of guilt and manipulation finally finding release. Hilary held her daughter tightly, her own silent tears wetting Ashley's hair. Marga discreetly left the room, giving the two the moment of privacy they so desperately needed. The distant sound of city traffic was the only witness to this long-awaited reconciliation. Mother and daughter remained embraced, as if trying to make up for all the lost time in a single moment. When they finally parted, Ashley wiped her tears away with the back of her hands, as she did as a child. Her face was marked by pain, but there was something else in her eyes now, a growing determination. "What are we going to do now, Mom?" she asked, her voice still trembling. The afternoon light filtered through the apartment curtains, creating golden patterns on the hardwood floor. Hilary and Ashley were seated across from each other, a chasm of silence and unspoken emotions opening between them. Cups of coffee cooled untouched on the coffee table, mute witnesses to the moment of transformation. Ashley had spent the past few hours absorbing the truth, how John had manipulated her, how he had built an elaborate sham to destroy her own mother. Her fingers trembled slightly, fiddling with the edge of the cup, unable to find rest after so much revelation. "He planned it all," Ashley murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "Every document, every accusation. It was all an elaborate lie." Tears began to form in her eyes, not of sadness but of a rage that grew like an uncontrollable flame. Hilary watched her daughter, seeing the same determination that had made her build an empire decades ago being born in that moment. Her hands, marked by years of hard work, found Ashley's young and smooth hands. "It wasn't just about destroying us," Hilary said, her voice calm but charged with an intensity that made Ashley shudder. "It was a meticulous plan to take our company, our assets, our lives." The documents scattered across the table seemed to scream their truths. Bank statements, system logs, testimonies. Each paper was a piece of a perverse puzzle that John had built over the years. Ashley abruptly stood up, walking to the window. The city of Chicago stretched out before her, its buildings and streets carrying stories of power and ambition. "How could we not have seen this before?" she asked, her reflection in the glass revealing a face marked by hurt and determination. Hilary approached, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Manipulators like John are masters at creating illusions. They build trust millimeter by millimeter until you can no longer distinguish truth from lies." A heavy silence filled the apartment. Outside, traffic continued its incessant movement, oblivious to the family drama unfolding at that moment. "What are we going to do?" Ashley finally asked, turning to face her mother. Her eyes shone with a mixture of pain, anger, and an almost palpable desire for justice. Hilary held her daughter's hands in her own, her steady gaze meeting Ashley's. The question hung in the air for a moment, heavy as destiny. "If he thinks he's going to have everything that's ours," Hilary replied, her voice charged with a conviction that made Ashley shudder, "I'll show him what he's going to have." The words seemed to vibrate in the air, carrying with them the weight of years of betrayal and the burning desire to re-establish the truth. Ashley felt a shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of an emotion akin to excitement. "How?" she asked, her voice now steadier. Hilary walked over to a brown leather folder, removing a series of carefully organized documents. "First, we're going to dismantle every scheme he's built, every shell company, every suspicious transfer. We are going to expose it all." Ashley's eyes scanned the documents, her business mind already beginning to process the information. "The system records the accountant gave us. That's more than enough for a criminal investigation." "Not just criminal," Hilary smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, but that carried a promise of retribution. "We're going to destroy everything he's built, every contract, every partnership, every investment." Ashley leaned over the documents, her hand tracing invisible lines connecting different evidence. "He not only forged documents against you," she murmured, But there's a pattern. Other companies, other scams. Exactly, Hillary confirmed. And now we have proof. Not just to defend ourselves, but to expose him completely. The afternoon was turning into evening, the city lights creating a mosaic of shadows in the apartment. Mother and daughter remained side by side, united not just by blood, but by a greater purpose. He's going to pay, Ashley whispered, her voice laden with a determination that perfectly recalled Hillary at her best moments. And there, amidst scattered documents and the Chicago skyline painting itself orange and purple, a plan of revenge was born. It wouldn't just be about reclaiming what they had lost, but about showing the world the true face of injustice. Night fell, and with it, the first steps of a battle that promised to be epic. The sun had barely risen when Hillary parked in front of her construction company. The modern building, though smaller than her former company, represented everything she had regained in recent years. The employees were already waiting for her, gathered in the parking lot as instructed. Their faces showed curiosity about the unusual early call. "Good morning, everyone," Hillary began, her voice carrying an authority she hadn't heard in herself for a long time. "Today we'll have a special job. We're going to demolish a mansion." She paused, observing her team's surprised expressions. "It's not a common demolition, it's my old house." The machine operators exchanged confused looks. The oldest of them, Jose, who had worked with Hillary for years, took a step forward. "Ms. Hillary, are you sure? That mansion is an architectural masterpiece." His voice carried genuine concern, mixed with respect. Hillary smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That mansion represents everything that was stolen from me, Jose. Today it's not just a demolition, it's a reckoning." She opened a folder revealing all the necessary authorizations. "It's all legal. The property is still partially in my name, and I have authorization from the current co-owner, my daughter." The machines were prepared with professional efficiency. Excavators, bulldozers, and demolition equipment formed an impressive procession through the city streets. Hillary led the convoy in her car, each kilometer bringing her closer to her revenge. The sun was now starting to gild the city's buildings, promising a memorable day. Hillary's heart raced as the mansion came into view around the corner. There it stood, majestic as ever, its white walls gleaming in the morning light. Every window, every balcony, every architectural detail held memories, some sweet, others bitter. "Position the machines," she ordered over the radio, her voice betraying none of the emotion she felt. The street soon filled with the sound of heavy engines being strategically positioned around the mansion. Hillary knew John was still sleeping inside. Her private investigation service had confirmed it. Part of her wondered if this wasn't too cruel, but then she remembered her nights on the street, the despair, the humiliation. The neighbors were starting to come out of their houses, drawn by the unusual noise. Some recognized Hillary immediately, whispering among themselves. She ignored the looks and comments, focused solely on her mission. She climbed into the cab of the largest excavator, adjusting the controls with the precision of someone well acquainted with the equipment. One of her employees approached the cab, concerned. "Ms. Hillary, are you sure you want to operate the machine yourself?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on the mansion. "Some things we need to do with our own hands, Ricardo. This is one of them." The sun was fully up now, illuminating the surreal scene unfolding on that elegant street. Hillary turned on the radio communicator. "Everyone in position?" The affirmative responses came one after another. She took a deep breath, her hands steady on the controls. "Then let's begin." The first impact of the excavator against the mansion's side wall echoed like thunder through the silent neighborhood. The sound of shattering glass and crumbling concrete created a chaotic symphony that woke the entire street. Hillary, hands firm on the controls, watched the first signs of panic inside the house. Lights being hastily turned on, distant shouts of confusion. From atop the cab, she could see the destruction beginning to spread. The walls that had once sheltered so many happy memories were now giving way one by one. The east wing of the mansion, where John's office was located, was the first to completely collapse. Papers flew like macabre confetti, documents and contracts scattering across the impeccably maintained garden. "Stop! Stop immediately!" John's voice echoed across the grounds as he ran out of the house in his silk pajamas. His usually controlled face now contorted into a mask of panic and disbelief. His perfectly groomed hair was disheveled, and there was a superficial cut on his forehead, likely caused by falling debris. Hillary increased the excavator's power, now attacking the mansion's main structure. Each strike was precise, calculated to cause maximum destruction with controlled safety. The other machines joined the demolition dance, surrounding the property in a synchronized ballet of destruction. "Have you gone insane?" John shouted, now running through the garden, dodging falling pieces of concrete. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Hillary finally stopped her machine, raising the cab to face him from above. Her face was serene, almost satisfied, as she watched the man who had destroyed her life now running in panic. "I know exactly what I'm doing, John." Her voice came over the loudspeaker she had installed on the machine. "I'm giving you exactly what you deserve, nothing." The last word was punctuated by the deafening sound of another wall collapsing, this time the living room, where so many family dinners had taken place. The neighbors now formed a small crowd, some filming with their cell phones, others frantically calling the police. John tried to maintain her composure, but the panic in her eyes was evident. "This is madness. It's a crime. I'll sue you for this," she shouted, her voice failing when one of the excavators knocked down the garage, destroying her imported cars. "Sue?" Hillary laughed, a sound that carried years of bitterness. "With what evidence, John? The same you forged against me?" She motioned, and the machines intensified their work. The pool was now filled with rubble, the water mixed with concrete, creating a grey paste that perfectly symbolized the destruction of the dreams he had stolen from her. John tried to run back inside the house, probably to save something important, but was prevented by the security guards Hillary had strategically positioned. "You can't do this," he shouted, his mask of a controlled man completely destroyed. "There's a fortune in documents in there." "What a pity," Hillary replied coldly, watching another wall collapse. "It must be terrible to lose everything you have, isn't it? To be kicked out of your own home, to be publicly humiliated?" Each question was accompanied by another blow from the machines, transforming the mansion into ruins before everyone's eyes. The sound of police sirens began to mix with the noise of the demolition. The red and blue lights reflected off the debris of the mansion, creating a surreal spectacle on that morning that was already entering the neighborhood's history. The destruction was almost complete. Where once stood an imposing mansion, now only ruins and dust remained. John, still in her dust-covered pajamas, smiled as she saw the patrol cars arriving. "Now you'll see, you crazy woman. Police!" "She's destroying my property." He ran toward the officers coming out of the cars, his face a mask of anticipated victory. Hillary, however, remained calm in her elevated position on the excavator. In the neighboring mansion's kitchen, Ashley watched everything on television, her coffee cup forgotten between her trembling fingers. The local station broadcast the demolition live, the cameras capturing every moment of destruction. Suddenly the cup slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor when she saw her mother descend from the machine with a folder of documents. "Officers!" Hillary's voice rang out clear and firm as she walked toward the police. "Here is all the necessary documentation for this demolition, including permits from the city and proof of ownership." She opened the folder, revealing another set of papers. "And here is the evidence of the crimes committed by Mr. John Garcia." John's smile froze on his face. Hillary continued, her voice now carrying the weight of 2 years of planning. "Forgery of documents, embezzlement, fraud in various companies. It's all here, including records of transfers made on impossible days when our system was under maintenance." The officers began examining the documents, their expressions gradually changing from skepticism to professional seriousness. John took a step back, all color draining from his face. "This is a lie, she's making it all up." But his voice no longer carried the same confidence as before. One of the officers approached John, handcuffs in his hands. "Mr. Garcia, you are under arrest for questioning." The metallic sound of the handcuffs closing echoed down the street, overpowering the noise of the last walls collapsing. The neighbors watched in silence, many still filming with their cell phones. The dust from the demolition began to settle, revealing the complete scene of destruction. Where once stood a luxurious mansion, now only rubble and memories remained. Hillary watched everything with a serene expression, while John was placed in the police car, still shouting threats and accusations. Next door, Ashley watched the live broadcast, silent tears streaming down her face as she saw her ex-husband being taken away by the police. The broken cup at her feet seemed a perfect reflection of how her life had shattered, and now finally it could be rebuilt on more solid foundations. The neighbors watched from the safety of their walls, some with cell phones in hand, others simply paralyzed by the unbelievable scene. Donna Carmela, a lady who had lived on the block for decades, murmured to her maid, "I've never seen anything like it in all my years. That woman is making history." Amidst the rubble, Hilary found an old photograph. It was an image of her with Ashley when her daughter was still a child. For the briefest moment, her gaze softened, but soon after, she tucked the photo into her briefcase, her face once again transforming into a mask of determination. The police officers who had initially been called to prevent the demolition now merely observed. Hilary's documents were irrefutable, her legal authorizations absolutely correct. John Garcia, her ex-son-in-law, had been arrested hours before, making this demolition even more symbolic. "Cut here," Hilary pointed to a specific part of the structure. The excavator obeyed, revealing a portion of the foundation that had inscriptions from when the house was built. Her name, the name of her late husband, was literally being destroyed. The live broadcast showed every possible angle. Internet users from all over the United States watched this surreal scene of a woman who was literally demolishing her past to build her future. Comments of support and shock multiplied on social media. "That's why you shouldn't underestimate a woman," one internet user commented. "She not only gets revenge, she does it with class and legality." Hilary walked to the center of the rubble, her legs firm, her body upright. Each step was calculated. Each movement carried the elegance of someone rewriting their own story. The cameras didn't miss a single detail. Rafael Martinez continued his narration. "What we are witnessing today, viewers, is not just a demolition. It's a woman rewriting her destiny with her own hands." A helicopter hovered overhead, capturing an epic image. Hilary, alone, amidst a landscape of debris, illuminated by the morning sun. Her demolition machines around her, like silent guardians, ready to obey every command. The last main wall collapsed with a rumble that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Dust spread, creating a dramatic cloud around Hilary. When the dust settled, there she was, imposing, unwavering. Her navy blue suit didn't have a single stain, her grey hair was perfectly arranged. It was as if the goddess of justice herself had descended to rewrite history. The queen had reclaimed her kingdom, and the whole world was watching. A month had passed since the dramatic demolition of the mansion. The office of the new headquarters of Miller United Constructors occupied the 20th floor of one of Chicago's most prestigious commercial buildings. The meeting room, with its floor-to-ceiling glass walls, offered a spectacular view of the city that Hilary and Ashley were now preparing to transform together. The large oval meeting table was surrounded by eager executives, all awaiting the official announcement of the merger between the companies. Hilary, seated at the head of the table, emanated an aura of quiet power, her grey hair framing a face that carried the serenity of someone who had finally found justice. By her side, Ashley organized the final presentations on her laptop, her fingers moving with the precision she had inherited from her mother. The murmurs in the room ceased when Hilary stood up. The navy blue suit she wore was a silent statement of elegance and authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her clear, confident voice filling the space, "today we are not merely announcing a corporate merger. We are marking the beginning of a new era in civil construction in Chicago." The automated curtains began to close softly, plunging the room into the necessary dimness for the presentation. Ashley stood up, positioning herself beside her mother. The moment did not go unnoticed by those present, mother and daughter side by side again, as it should have been during those 2 lost years. "Our new company," Hilary continued as the first images appeared on the screen, "will combine the innovation and dynamism of my daughter's construction company with the experience and solidity we have built over decades." Her eyes met Marga's, seated discreetly at the back of the room, a proud smile on her face. Ashley took over, her voice carrying a controlled emotion. "All previous contracts will be honored and every employee will have their place secured in the new structure." She paused, looking directly at the apprehensive faces around the table. "But more importantly, We are establishing new standards of transparency and corporate governance. The slides showed impressive growth projection graphs and ambitious expansion plans. Hillary watched with satisfaction as the executives' expressions gradually changed from apprehension to genuine interest. Every number, every project presented, was proof that the future would be much greater than the past. Our first initiative, Hillary announced as a familiar image appeared on the screen, will be on the site of the former Miller Mansion. A murmur went through the room. Everyone there knew the story of the spectacular demolition that had dominated the headlines. Where once stood a house built on lies, we will erect a residential complex that will be a symbol of renewal. Ashley projected the plans for the new development, a bold project that blended sustainability with affordable luxury. Each apartment, she explained, will have elements harking back to the history of traditional Mexican architecture, but with all the modernity our clients deserve. Her face shone with enthusiasm as she detailed the technical specifications. The presentation continued with Hillary and Ashley alternating in conducting it, their synchronicity evidencing that the lost time had not destroyed their deep connection. The executives took furious notes, occasionally exchanging impressed glances. The new company would not only be a merger of assets, but a transformative force in the market. As the presentation progressed, some concerned voices began to emerge. Carlos Ramirez, the former financial director of Ashley's company, raised his hand. "With all due respect, ladies," he began, nervously adjusting his tie, "but after everything that happened, how can we ensure the stability of the new company?" The investors are apprehensive. A tense silence fell over the room. Hillary and Ashley exchanged a quick glance before addressing the question. Other executives shifted in their chairs, clearly sharing the same concern. The shadow of recent events still loomed over everyone there. "Mr. Ramirez," Hillary responded, her voice calm but firm, "I understand your concern. That's why we implemented a triple governance system with monthly independent audits." She gestured, and Ashley projected a new slide showing the complex financial control system they had developed. But the doubts didn't stop there. Marina Torres, the operations director, also spoke up. "The employees are insecure. Many fear mass layoffs with the merger." Her voice trembled slightly, representing the fear of dozens of families who depended on the company. Ashley stepped forward, facing her team directly. "There will be no layoffs," she declared firmly. "On the contrary, our expansion plan foresees a 30% increase in staff over the next 2 years. She began detailing the new projects that would ensure not only the maintenance, but the growth of the teams. The murmur in the room increased. Jorge Mendez, one of the minority shareholders, abruptly stood up. "And what about the contracts signed during the previous administration with Mr. Garcia?" John's name caused a visible shudder in some present. "Many of those agreements may be compromised." Hillary maintained her composure, although her fingers gripped the edge of the table slightly. "Each contract is being meticulously reviewed by our legal team," she explained. "Those made legally will be maintained. The others—" She paused significantly. "Well, you saw in the newspapers what happens when we discover irregularities." The tension in the room was palpable. Some older executives, who had worked directly with John, began exchanging nervous glances. Ashley noticed the discomfort and decided to intervene. "Our goal is not to witch hunt," she stated. "It's to rebuild and grow, but this time on solid foundations." The debate intensified, with several voices overlapping. Concerns about the market, competition, reputation, all the wounds opened by the recent crisis seemed to expose themselves at once. Hillary and Ashley remained steadfast, responding to each query with concrete data and well-structured plans. Marga, observing from the back of the room, noticed how mother and daughter perfectly complemented each other in that moment of pressure. While Hillary brought the necessary experience and assurance, Ashley demonstrated the dynamism and vision for the future that the new company needed. The meeting extended far beyond schedule, each doubt being carefully addressed, each fear confronted with solid planning. The future of the company, and the hundreds of families that depended on it, was at stake in that room. The sun was already setting over Chicago when the last executives began to leave the meeting room. The initial tension had been replaced by cautious optimism. Hillary and Ashley remained in the room, observing the city through the panoramic windows, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink that seemed to celebrate the new beginning. "We made it, Mom," Ashley whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Hillary smiled, enveloping her daughter in a tight embrace. The city lights were starting to turn on, creating a carpet of stars below them. It was a view worthy of the historic moment they were living. "Sometimes we need to destroy everything to rebuild something stronger," said Hillary, her words echoing through the now empty room. Their reflection in the glass showed two different women from the ones they were a few months ago. Stronger, more united, wiser. The city stretching beyond the windows would be the stage for their new story. Marga silently entered the room, carrying a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. The sound of the popping cork broke the contemplative silence, making the 3 women smile. "To rebuilding," Marga toasted, raising her glass. "Not just a company, but a family." The glasses clinked as the last ray of sun disappeared over the horizon. Hillary watched the golden bubbles dancing in her glass, reminded of the long journey that brought them here, from the nights on the street to the spectacular demolition, from the pain of betrayal to the sweetness of reconciliation. "The plans for the mansion grounds have already been approved," Ashley commented, picking up some blueprints from the table. "It will be our first major launch as a unified company." Her eyes shone with enthusiasm as she showed her mother and Marga the details of the project. The residential complex that would replace the mansion would be an architectural masterpiece. Where once stood a house built on lies, a symbol of rebirth would now rise. Each apartment would be a testament that it is possible to rebuild, no matter how deep the destruction. Hillary walked up to her new desk, running her fingers over the golden plaque that bore her name and title, President. Next to it, a newly framed photo showed her and Ashley smiling, with Marga between them, her new family, forged through tribulations and strengthened by adversity. The phone rang, bringing the 3 women back to reality. It was the company's lawyer with news about the lawsuits against John. But that no longer mattered so much. He was just a closed chapter in a story that now headed in a very different direction. The moonlight began bathing the city, blending with the lights of the buildings in a unique spectacle. Hillary approached the window, her champagne glass still half full, observing the glowing dots that marked each of her ventures on Chicago's urban landscape. "You know," Hillary began, her soft voice carrying years of experience, "when I started in this business, my father told me that building wasn't just about raising walls. It was about creating dreams, giving shape to hopes." Ashley stepped closer, putting an arm around her mother's shoulders. "And now we're making those dreams come true together, Mom. Every project, every building we erect is a story of new beginnings." Marga watched the two with a serene smile, refilling their glasses. "I remember the day we met, Hillary. You were just a young architect with big ideas, and I was a fresh-out-of-college accountant. Who would have thought we'd end up here?" The phone on the desk rang again. It was the representative from the Chicago Builders Association. Hillary put it on speakerphone. "Mrs. Miller, it's an honor to inform you that you've been chosen as Businesswoman of the Year. Your story of overcoming adversity has inspired the entire business community." The 3 women exchanged emotional looks. Ashley picked up a folder on the desk, revealing the plans for their next venture. A support center for women entrepreneurs with a daycare and co-working space. "This one will be special," Ashley explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We're going to call it the Hillary Miller Center, Building Futures. A place where other women can find the support they need to make their dreams come true." Hillary felt tears forming in her eyes. Outside, the city lights seemed to dance, creating hypnotic patterns on the office walls. A gentle breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying the scent of the flowers from the rooftop garden they had installed. "I have something for you both," said Marga, taking an envelope out of her purse. Inside was an old yellowed photograph, Hillary and Marga, young and smiling, standing in front of the first plot of land they had bought together. "So we never forget where we came from." Ashley studied the photograph with curiosity. "Mom, you're wearing the same necklace you gave me on my first day as vice president." Hillary instinctively touched her neck, where a different necklace now rested. A gift from Ashley to celebrate their reconciliation. The sound of helicopters sliced through the night air. It was the film crews shooting the documentary they were producing, about the Miller Builders story. The tale of two generations, it would be called, chronicling not just their business journey but also the emotional odyssey of a mother and daughter. "Sometimes I think," Hillary mused, watching the helicopter lights dance against the dark sky, "that everything we went through brought us exactly where we were meant to be. Stronger, wiser, more united." Marga raised her glass in a new toast. "To the family we chose, the battles that fortify us and the dreams we never stopped pursuing." The clink of glasses mingled with the sounds of the city below, creating a unique melody of celebration and hope. A group of employees were still working on the floor below, putting the final touches on preparations for the next day's launch. Their lively voices drifted up to the office, carrying the infectious energy of a fresh start. "It's funny," Ashley commented, "how life comes full circle. That plot where our mansion used to be. Now it will be a place where hundreds of families build their own stories." Hillary smiled, embracing her daughter once more. The reflection of the three women in the window glass told a story of resilience, love, and redemption. The city of Chicago continued its nightly dance below them, a silent witness to their extraordinary journey. The hours dragged on as John continued her degrading task. Her hands, once soft and well cared for, were now calloused and full of blisters. Each broken rock seemed a reminder of how she had lost everything: her status, her comfort, her freedom. The relentless sun made every movement a torture. The other prisoners passed by her, carrying their own loads of crushed stones, occasionally accidentally bumping into her shoulders. John had learned not to react, to keep her head down. Her former arrogance had turned into a forced submission, necessary to survive in that new, brutal world. Lunch was served on battered metal trays, the food always cold and flavorless. John sat alone, as always, trying to ignore the hostile glances and spiteful comments from the other inmates. "Hey, Garcia," someone shouted from across the cafeteria. "How does it feel to eat like regular people?" From atop the guard towers, the guards watched the courtyard with indifference. To them, John was just another number, another criminal serving time. The man who once manipulated millions was now reduced to yet another statistic in the prison system, her power and influence completely evaporated. As she broke another rock, John thought about how she had ended up there. Each blow of the crusher seemed to echo her past choices, her manipulations, her betrayals. Sweat trickled down her face, mixing with the dust, creating grey streaks on her skin that looked like tears of remorse. The day at the prison took a drastic turn for the worse when a guard approached John with an official paper in his hands. "Garcia, more news for you," he announced, a malicious grin playing on his lips. "The judge has just extended your sentence. Seems they found a few more companies you destroyed." John felt her legs weaken. The crusher slipped from her hands, nearly hitting her feet. The other inmates stopped their work, watching the scene with morbid interest. The paper the guard held was like a death sentence for her last hopes of imminent freedom. "5 more years, the guard continued, savoring each word. "Apparently you had a pattern, didn't you? Always choosing successful businesswomen, gaining their trust, destroying their lives." With each word, the other inmates drew closer, forming a threatening circle around John. One of the older prisoners, known as El Coyote, stepped forward. "So you like stealing from women, huh?" His gruff voice carried an implicit threat. "My sister lost everything to a con man like you." The other inmates murmured in approval, closing the circle even tighter. The sun seemed even more merciless now as John tried to maintain her composure. Her orange uniform was soaked with sweat, not just from the heat, but from the growing fear settling in her chest. The crushed rocks around her seemed a perfect metaphor for how her life had shattered. "And there's more," the guard continued, unfolding another paper. "Your secret offshore accounts have been discovered. Everything has been seized and will be returned to your victims." This news prompted a wave of laughter from the inmates. John felt her last thread of hope snap. All the money she had hidden, her guarantee for a comfortable life after prison, was gone. The circle of inmates kept closing in. Some slammed their crushers against the ground in a menacing rhythm. The guards in the towers seemed conveniently distracted, as they often were when prison justice was about to be served. "You know what's worse?" an inmate shouted, pointing to a crumpled newspaper circulating around the courtyard. "Look who's on the cover." The front page showed a photo of Hillary and Ashley smiling next to the headline, "Santos Construction Empire, Mother and daughter revolutionize real estate market. John tried to back away, but found only the rough prison wall behind her. The newspaper passed from hand to hand, each inmate sneering at how her former victims had risen and prospered while she withered away there, broken and humiliated. The sound of crushers slamming against the ground grew louder, creating a menacing symphony that echoed through the prison walls. John Garcia, the woman who once thought herself untouchable, was now utterly alone, surrounded by inmates thirsty for justice, facing an even longer sentence, and without a penny saved for her future. The Chicago sunset painted the sky in deep shades of red as John was led back to her cell. Her body ached, not just from the hard labor, but also from the accidents she had suffered in the courtyard. The guards had conveniently delayed intervening when the other inmates decided to teach her a lesson about respect. Through the bars of her window, she could see the new Miller construction developments rising on the horizon. Modern, imposing buildings that seemed to mock her current situation. Where her mansion once stood, the most impressive of them now rose, a residential complex that had become the city's new symbol of success. The crumpled newspaper was still in her cell, the photo of Hillary and Ashley smiling, seeming to stare at her with silent satisfaction. The headlines detailed the company's resounding success after the merger, the new projects, the record sales. Every word was like a stab in her already shattered pride. The nighttime sounds of the prison filled the air, metal doors slamming, guards shouting orders, the occasional distant scream. John huddled on her lower bunk, her body protesting with every movement. The guard's words about the added years to her sentence echoed in her mind, along with the news of her financial reserves being lost. "Hey, con man!" an inmate shouted from a nearby cell. "More rocks to break tomorrow!" Laughter echoed down the hall, followed by a string of veiled threats. John pulled the thin blanket over her head, trying to hide from the reality she had built for herself. Through the small barred window, he could see the city lights turning on one by one. Somewhere out there, Hillary and Ashley were probably in their luxurious offices, planning new ventures, expanding their empire. The irony was not lost on him. He had tried to destroy them, but ended up being the architect of his own destruction. A new building was starting to rise on the horizon, its steel beams glinting in the last light of day. It was another Miller construction, another symbol of his failure. The empire he had tried to steal had not only survived, but was stronger than ever. The night fell completely over the prison, plunging the cell into deep shadows. John remained awake, his aching body lying on the thin mattress, while he listened to the distant sound of crushing machines, the last work shift still in progress. Tomorrow would be just another day breaking rocks, and then another and another. The moon rose in the sky, dimly illuminating his cell through the bars. On the horizon, the Miller construction buildings shone like beacons of success, their lights never fading, just like the legacy that Hillary had built. The camera slowly pulls away, showing John as an insignificant figure in his cell, while in the background, Hillary and Ashley's new ventures rise majestic against the night sky of Chicago. The last light of day was completely extinguished, leaving John in his dark cell with only his thoughts as company. The distant echo of the crushing machine was replaced by the murmur of the other inmates, their voices laden with stories of remorse and perdition. In his mind, flashbacks of his former life tormented him incessantly. "Garcia!" called the night guard, banging his baton against the bars. "You have a visitor tomorrow." John looked up, a spark of hope quickly extinguished when the guard continued. "More investigators. Seems they found another scheme of yours in Philadelphia." The thin mattress creaked with every movement as John turned, trying to find a position that would relieve his aching back. In the next cell, an inmate began to hum an old Mexican lullaby, the same one his grandmother used to sing, reminding him of a time when there was still innocence in his life. "You know what they're saying out there, Garcia," the guard continued, his voice laden with scorn. "That mansion your mother-in-law demolished? Now it's the most luxurious building in the city, $1,000,000 apartments. And you know the best part? There's a 3-year waiting list to buy a unit." The night wind carried the scent of dirt and concrete from the yard, mixed with the distant aroma of tortillas from a nearby restaurant, another reminder of the world beyond the bars he no longer belonged to. His fingers, now calloused and cracked, traced invisible patterns on the rough cell wall. "Hey, Prince of Fraud," shouted another inmate. "Tell us what it's like to lose everything." "What it's like to see your victims become queens while you rot in here." Laughter echoed through the hallway, each guffaw like a stab to his already shattered pride. John closed his eyes, but the images continued to torment him. Hillary's triumphant smile as she operated the excavator, Ashley's look of disappointment upon discovering his lies, the newspaper headlines announcing his downfall. Each memory was a new kind of torture. A rat scurried across the cell floor, its tiny claws scratching the concrete. John watched the animal find a piece of stale bread and carry it to its burrow. Even the rats seemed to have more luck than he did now. At least they had the freedom to come and go in the shadows. "Double work for you tomorrow, rich rat," announced another guard passing by the cell. "New shipment of rocks just came in. Big ones, just how you deserve." The sound of the boots fading away echoed through the corridor, marking another day of humiliation to come. In the darkness of the night, John could hear the distant sound of city sirens, the occasional roar of luxury car engines, the kind of car he used to drive. Now his world had been reduced to a few square meters of cold concrete and steel bars. "Thinking about life, Garcia?" taunted an elderly inmate from the cell across. "Well, think about it. Every rock you break is a tear you made someone shed. Every callus on your hands is a life you destroyed. Justice has a way of collecting its debts." John shrank even further into his bunk, the old man's words cutting deep into his conscience. The stillness of the night was broken only by the occasional sound of metal doors slamming and the jingle of the guards' keys, the nocturnal symphony of the prison that was now the soundtrack of his life. John Garcia, the man who once dreamed of owning an empire, now possessed nothing but rocks to break and a lifetime of regrets to ponder. Did you like the story of Hillary and Ashley? Then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.